A blunt self-critique by the National Republican Party concludes that while the GOP is flourishing in many state capitals, it is increasingly marginalized and out of touch at the federal level. The Republican National Committee's postmortem of November's election losses, released Monday, draws a contrast between the inclusive and appealing manner of the country's GOP governors and the party's federal wing, whose message is not working beyond core Republican adherents. Unless changes are made, the report states, it will be increasingly difficult for Republicans to win another presidential election in the near future. The nearly 100-page analysis compiled in the past several months by 5 veteran GOP campaign advisors describes the party as ideologically rigid, still clinging to the days of Ronald Reagan, unable to speak to a wider electorate and increasingly viewed by voters as indifferent to the struggles of average people. Republican Party Chairman Reince Priebus, who created the task force to dig into the party's woes and offer remedies, called the assessment the most unsparing and comprehensive ever done by a major political party. In focus groups, voters who had left the Republican Party said they found the GOP to be scary, narrow-minded, out of touch and the party of stuffy old men. Jim Brown III, a registered Republican and retired 79-year-old photographer from Naples, Florida, said the party is going to need to do a lot to win him back. You don't need 100 pages to determine what's wrong with the Republican Party, he said. The party is just out of touch, and has left me behind. It needs to catch up with the times. Most of the scores of prescriptions the RNC panel put forward in the report focus on ways to improve delivery of the party's message. In response, Mr. Priebus said the RNC plans to launch a campaign to reach out to minority groups and young voters, to bolster its online targeting of supporters and to create a permanent campaign presence in a number of states. The panel also proposed changes to how the GOP chooses its presidential nominee, such as limiting the number of primary debates, condensing the primary calendar and moving the national convention into the early summer, all in the interest, it said, of protecting and strengthening the eventual nominee. A shortened primary schedule with fewer debates would likely help the better-funded candidates, who would have the money to build name recognition, while making it harder for candidates with less funding and possibly insurgent candidates, of which there were many in 2012, to take flight. That nearly 24 debates during the last GOP primary helped catapult at least 5 candidates to brief front-runner status. At the same time, the party offered some unsparing advice to current lawmakers and future candidates, some of which appears to take issue with the Republican calls for austerity and for limiting the size and scope of government. To grow as a party, the RNC assessment points out, Republican policymakers must realize that economically struggling voters don't care if the help comes from the private sector or the government, they just want help. The report notes that instead of connecting with voters' concerns, we too often sound like bookkeepers. House Majority Whip Kevin McCarthy, R., California, took the critique in stride. Republicans don't need to have the report to know they've got a long way to grow to move the party forward, he said. He added, many times we don't deliver the message well, stressing that Republicans need to speak to the heart, not just the head. The task force generally shied away from taking policy stances, with 2 exceptions. It said the GOP must embrace comprehensive immigration reform, which has mostly come to mean a rewrite of laws to give legal status or citizenship to people who entered the country illegally, a proposition opposed by many in the party. The task force also said the party must in fact indeed be inclusive and welcoming on social issues, though it didn't specify which issues. The report arrives just as a prominent conservative, Senator Rob Portman, R., Ohio, has engendered debate in the party by switching his stance to support gay marriage. Jesse Ferguson, communications director of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, called the report a total indictment of the Republican agenda in Congress. He suggested that someone should probably send Republicans in Congress a copy of the report. Texas Senator John Cornyn, the ranking Senate Republican, called the report a genuine effort to identify and diagnose the problems we had in this last election. The report comes at a moment when Republicans aligned with the Tea Party and insurgent candidates are arguing that conservatives should reject the guidance of party insiders and consultants, urging that they look instead to the GOP's conservative grassroots for renewal. One social conservative, former presidential candidate Garrett Bowers, called the report an act of political navel-gazing. He said GOP leaders should fire the pollsters and adhere to the party's core beliefs. Millions of Americans vote for Republicans precisely because of the value radicalism of the Democrats, Mr. Bowers said. We would head off a cliff to abandon them.